Here is a person on your mind right now. Maybe you haven't seen them in weeks. Maybe they never texted back. Maybe the last conversation ended weird and you still don't know why. And no matter what you do, no matter how busy you get, your brain just keeps pulling you back to them. Here's what's wild about that. It's not your emotions doing it. It's a mechanical glitch. And once you understand exactly how it works, the whole thing starts to make a lot more sense. This video is going to walk you through what's actually happening inside your brain when you can't stop thinking about someone. And I want to be upfront. A lot of what we're going to cover is going to feel counterintuitive. The popular explanation is that you're just really into this person, but the science tells a stranger, more specific story than that. And there's one thing in particular, something buried in research on music of all places, that I think completely reframes the whole experience. We'll get there. Let's start with the second most surprising thing on this list, because it actually sets up everything else. There's a psychologist named Dorothy Tennov who spent years interviewing hundreds of people about what it feels like to be consumed by thoughts of someone. What she found was that there's a specific state, she called it limerence, that is fundamentally different from just being in love. And the distinction is one that almost no one talks about. Limerence isn't defined by how often you think about someone. It's defined by whether the thoughts are voluntary. People in a limerent state don't choose to think about the person. The thoughts arrive on their own, interrupt whatever else is happening, and they're often unwanted even when the feeling underneath them is warm. Some of Tennov's subjects reported that between 30 and 95% of their waking thought was occupied by the other person during the most intense phases. Not 30 to 95% of their free time, their waking thought. That's not a feeling. That's closer to a cognitive takeover. So what's actually causing that? Why does the brain lock onto one person and refuse to let go? The answer starts with something called the default mode network, and it's one of the more fascinating things in all of neuroscience. In 2001, a neurologist named Marcus Raichle published the paper that named what he'd been observing. The default mode network, a system of brain regions that activated specifically when a person stopped focusing on the outside world. Before that, scientists assumed that when you weren't actively doing something, your brain was basically idling. Turns out that assumption was completely wrong. The default mode network consumes roughly 20% of your brain's energy even during rest. And here's what it's doing with all that energy. It's consolidating memories, processing emotions, imagining future scenarios, and maintaining your sense of self. It's the network that runs when you're thinking about other people, thinking about yourself, replaying the past, and planning the future. It is essentially the machinery that generates your inner life. And here's the part that matters for you right now. You're not trying to activate concentration. You're trying to suppress a powerful network that wants to turn back on. Every time you try to focus on work, on a conversation, on literally anything else, your default mode network is fighting to pull your attention back inward. Back to the unresolved thing, back to that person. Which brings us to the mechanism. And this is the part I promised you earlier, the one that reframes everything. You know what an earworm is. A song gets stuck in your head and you can't shake it. It just loops over and over, whether you want it to or not. Researchers who study earworms found something interesting. Most earworms are fragments, which very likely contributes to their stubborn longevity. Incomplete memories last longer than complete ones, a phenomenon known as the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect comes from a 1927 study that had nothing to do with music or relationships. A psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik noticed something about waiters. She was an early 20th century psychologist who realized that waiters could remember customers' orders right up until the order was complete. But then the memory disappeared. She researched what happened if the waiter was interrupted while dealing with an order, and found that when interrupted, they remembered the information for an extended period. In short, your brain keeps essential jobs in your working memory, and when that job is complete, the mind gets rid of the information that's no longer useful. But when interrupted, the brain holds on to it until the task is complete. Now apply that to people. If a song has a particularly unresolved melody, Or if you only hear part of it, your brain may loop the melody in an attempt to finish the sequence. And the exact same thing happens with a person. If a connection ends without resolution, no closure, no explanation, no real ending, your brain treats it like an open tab. When interrupted partway through a task, one feels a sense of incompleteness, resulting in an increased desire to finish the task and a greater prominence of the task in memory. The person who ghosted you, the conversation that ended weird, the relationship that just kind of dissolved, your brain doesn't file those away. It keeps them open, active, circulating. And here's the part that makes it worse. You've probably been told at some point to just stop thinking about them, just distract yourself, just move on. That advice is not only unhelpful, it's mechanically counterproductive. Trying to stop the earworm ironically reinforces its memory, and the same ironic process applies to thoughts about a person. The harder you try to suppress the thought, the more cognitive resources you dedicate to monitoring whether the thought has returned, which means you're essentially checking for them constantly. Telling someone to just stop thinking about a person is like telling them to not think about a pink elephant. The instruction itself is the problem. Be honest. When was the last time trying not to think about someone actually worked? Now, here's the thing I promised at the very beginning, the finding that almost nobody talks about, and the one that I think changes how you understand this entire experience. Most people assume that the intensity of this, the obsessive loop, the inability to focus, the way they keep showing up in your head, is a sign of how much you love the person. And that might be partially true, but researchers studying rejection found something that completely flips that logic. Rejected lovers express significantly greater activity in the right nucleus accumbens, core and ventral putamen pallidum, than did those who were happily in love. Let that land for a second. The people who had been dumped, who were no longer in a relationship, who had been rejected, showed more activity in the brain's craving and addiction circuitry than the people who were happily loved back. Helen Fisher and her colleagues put 15 people who had just been rejected in love into a brain scanner and found that those people who were still madly in love with somebody who had just dumped them still showed activity in the ventral tegmental area, a little factory near the base of the brain that pumps out dopamine. It gives you that elation. The rejection didn't turn off the craving, it turned it up. These regions have been associated with reward, especially uncertain large gains and losses. Uncertainty is the key word. When you don't know if you'll get the reward, the brain doesn't calm down, it escalates. It's the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. It's not the winning that hooks you, it's the not knowing. And an unresolved connection with another person is, neurologically speaking, the ultimate uncertain reward. So what you're actually dealing with is this. An unresolved connection triggers the Zeigarnik effect, which keeps the loop open in your default mode network, which is already burning 20% of your brain's energy just sitting there waiting to think about something. And if there's been any rejection or uncertainty involved, your craving circuitry is running hotter than it would if everything had gone perfectly. The obsession isn't proof of love, it's proof of incompletion. And here's the last piece, the one that ties it all together. Researchers who study the science of being in love use something called the passionate love scale to measure it. When they ran deeper analysis on that scale, they found it actually splits into two separate components, an obsession factor and a non-obsession factor. What you call love and what you call can't stop thinking about them are two statistically distinct things that just usually happen to travel together. Which means it's entirely possible to be stuck in the loop, the earworm, the open tab, the craving, without it being about love at all. It might just be about an unfinished song. The Zeigarnik effect explains why listening to the song helps extinguish it. We remember interrupted and incomplete thoughts better than completed and resolved ones, and involuntary thoughts occur because they are incomplete. The frequency of reoccurrence depends on the need to complete and resolve them. The same logic applies to people. Closure, real closure, the kind you give yourself rather than wait for, works the same way. You're not suppressing the thought, you're completing the loop, you're telling your brain the tab is closed. So here's where you actually are right now compared to where you were at the start of this video. You came in thinking this was an emotion problem. Turns out it's a completion problem. Your brain isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it's built to do, hold open tasks in memory until they're resolved. The person isn't stuck in your head because of how special they are. They're stuck because the story doesn't have an ending yet. And the moment you stop trying to force the thought out and start giving your brain a way to close the loop, the whole thing starts to loosen. If this made something click for you, drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious whether the earworm comparison hit the way I think it does, or whether something else in here landed harder for you. And if you want to go deeper on how the brain handles attachment, memory, and why some people are harder to get over than others, that video is right there. It picks up exactly where this one left off.